I should have known something was wrong the moment I stepped inside. The underground theater smelled of damp wood and old velvet, the kind of scent that clings to forgotten places. The air carried the faintest hint of something else, something metallic, something wrong. I pulled my coat tighter around me, my heels clicking against the black and white checkered tiles of the lobby. This wasn't a place meant to be found. Nestled beneath an old Victorian building in the heart of London, the theater had been abandoned for decades, but tonight the stage was set for something far worse than a performance. A uniformed officer stood by the entrance, his face pale beneath the dim chandelier light. He gave me a nod, then pushed open the heavy red curtain. Dr. Carter. Detective Alex Monroe's voice was low, edged with something like disbelief. He was standing at the edge of the stage, his silhouette cut sharply against the crime scene. "You're going to want to see this." I stepped forward, my pulse steady, trained for this. But nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. The stage had been transformed into a grotesque diorama. 5 bodies, suspended by nearly invisible strings, dangled in eerie stillness. Their limbs bent at unnatural angles, heads tilted as if listening for applause. The strings were attached to a complex system of pulleys above, keeping them in place like marionettes frozen mid-performance. The most disturbing part? Their faces. Each victim's mouth had been forced into a hollow smile, their eyes wide and vacant. But there was no tape, no wire, just the careful precision of a killer who knew how to manipulate flesh like an artist working with clay. A shiver ran down my spine. "Jesus," I murmured, stepping closer. "This is just like the Covent Garden case from 1873. Monroe finished grimly. "An unsolved murder from Victorian London. 5 actors, found hanged in their dressing rooms, strung up like puppets." I inhaled sharply. This wasn't coincidence. It was a message. Monroe handed me a folder. "We have a suspect. Found outside, covered in blood. Says he doesn't remember a thing, but he knows details he shouldn't." I opened the folder. A photograph stared back at me. A man in his early 30s, sharp features, dark eyes filled with something unreadable. His name was Daniel Weaver, and according to the police, he was the only person alive who could have done this. I closed the folder, my grip tightening. Somewhere above us, the wires creaked softly, as if the puppets were shifting in the dark. The show had only just begun. Daniel Weaver sat across from me in the dimly lit interrogation room, his wrists cuffed to the steel table. His fingers twitched slightly, the only sign of nerves, but his face remained unreadable. Dried blood stained the collar of his white dress shirt, darkening the edges where fabric met skin. I took my seat, laying my notebook down without opening it. I wanted to watch him first. Silence was a tool, and in my line of work it often revealed more than words. He met my gaze without hesitation. "You're the psychologist?" His voice was calm, smooth, too controlled for a man found covered in blood at the scene of a massacre. "I am." I leaned forward. "Dr. Evelyn Carter. I specialize in forensic profiling." A flicker of something crossed his face. "Recognition? Number something deeper. And you believe I did this?" He gestured slightly, his restraints clinking against the table. "I believe you were found covered in blood outside an underground theater where 5 people were murdered." His lips pressed together, but he didn't argue. He exhaled slowly, closing his eyes as if searching his own mind for answers. "I don't remember," he said finally. "Then tell me what you do remember." His fingers flexed again. "I woke up outside. My hands were shaking. My head felt wrong, like something was rattling inside it. I looked down, saw the blood, and then I heard the sirens. That's all." Monroe, standing in the corner, let out a quiet scoff. "Convenient." Daniel ignored him, his eyes locked onto mine. "But that's not the strange part." I waited. I knew. His voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. I knew what was inside before they told me. The stage, the bodies, the way they were arranged. It was all in my head before I ever saw it. A chill crept up my spine. "Explain," I said. "I saw it like a memory. Not like a dream, not like a nightmare. Like something I had done, except I know I didn't." He leaned forward, chains rattling. "Dr. Carter, what if I'm not the one in control?" The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I had studied killers, profiled them, unraveled their minds thread by thread. But Daniel Weaver wasn't like the others. There was no rage, no pleasure, no sense of justification. There was only uncertainty, and something else beneath it, something I couldn't yet name. "You're asking me if you were possessed?" I kept my voice even. He smiled faintly, but there was no amusement in it. "Wouldn't that be easier?" I watched him, searching for deception, for manipulation. But there was something terrifying about his sincerity. Monroe shifted behind me. "We found no signs of forced entry at the theater, no witnesses, just him." Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "Then find out what's inside my head," he said. I planned to, but I already had the sinking feeling that I wouldn't like what I found. I studied Daniel Weaver in the quiet hum of the interrogation room. He sat with his shoulders relaxed, his expression unreadable. But something about his stillness unnerved me. He wasn't fighting to prove his innocence, wasn't demanding a lawyer. He was waiting for me to pull apart the pieces of his mind, as if he needed to understand himself as much as I did. I had worked with murderers before. They came in many forms, the arrogant, the regretful, the ones who saw themselves as untouchable gods. But Daniel was something else. His uncertainty felt genuine, but the way he described the crime scene with perfect accuracy, that was impossible to ignore. I flipped open my notebook. "Tell me more about these memories." His fingers tapped against the table in uneven rhythm. "It's not just the images," he murmured. "It's the feeling. Like I've stood in that theater before. Like I've moved those bodies with my own hands." "But you don't believe you did?" His jaw tensed. "I don't know what I believe." I glanced at Monroe. He stood with arms crossed, unimpressed. "We've already run his prints against the crime scene. The blood on his clothes belongs to the victims. He's not walking out of here." Daniel exhaled through his nose. "I didn't expect to." I leaned in slightly. "Then help yourself, Daniel. Give me something real. Why were you at the theater?" A long silence stretched between us. He turned his head slightly, looking past me, past the walls of the room, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. "I was drawn there," he said finally. "Drawn how?" His dark eyes flicked back to mine. "I started dreaming about it 3 months ago. The stage, the red curtain, the strings. At first it was just flashes, but then the dreams got longer, more detailed. I could feel the ropes in my hands, smell the dust in the air. I'd wake up sweating, sometimes with scratches on my skin that weren't there the night before. Goosebumps pricked my arms. Daniel Weaver was either a pathological liar or something was very, very wrong." "You're saying something led you there? Something outside of your control?" I kept my voice even, but my pulse had picked up. His lips parted, but before he could answer, the door swung open. A young officer stepped in, face pale. "Detective, you need to see this." Monroe's brows furrowed. "See what?" The officer swallowed. "Another one. We just got a call. A crime scene. Same setup." He hesitated. "It happened an hour ago." Monroe's gaze snapped to Daniel. "That's impossible." But I was already watching Daniel. His expression hadn't changed, but a shadow passed over his features. Brief, unreadable. His voice was quiet when he finally spoke. "Then you know I didn't do it." I wasn't sure if that made things better, or much, much worse. The drive to the new crime scene was silent. Monroe sat stiffly in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel like he was trying to strangle it. I didn't blame him. If Daniel Weaver was in custody when the second murder occurred, then either he had an accomplice, someone following the same sick script, or something far more unsettling was at play. I turned my head slightly, watching the city blur past through the rain-slicked window. The thought crawled into my mind before I could stop it. What if Daniel was telling the truth? What if he really wasn't in control? The thought sat heavy in my chest as we pulled up to the crime scene. A second abandoned building. Another forgotten theater tucked away in the labyrinth of London's back streets. This one was smaller, its facade crumbling beneath years of neglect. But inside was something carefully, artfully arranged. The moment we stepped through the heavy doors, the smell hit me first. Varnish, dust, and something else. Something wet and coppery. Flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the stage. My breath hitched. 4 bodies, suspended mid-air by nearly invisible strings, their limbs bent at impossible angles, heads tilted as if frozen in silent applause. The scene was almost identical to the first, except for one crucial detail. A single body sat center stage, apart from the others. Unlike the victims, he wasn't strung up like a puppet. He was seated in a wooden chair, slumped forward, his face obscured by the shadows. I stepped closer. "Careful, Carter," Monroe warned, but I barely heard him. The chair was positioned under a single spotlight, the stark white beam cutting through the darkness like a scalpel. Something about the way the figure sat, the tilt of the head, the way the hands rested motionless on the lap, felt deliberate. I crouched beside him, my stomach tightening as I reached out and tilted his chin upward. I sucked in a sharp breath. The man's face was frozen in a grotesque expression. Not fear, not agony, but something worse. A wide, vacant grin stretched across his lips, his eyes unblinking. Not forced, not manipulated. It was as if he had died mid-laugh. Monroe muttered a curse behind me. The real horror settled in as I realized I recognized the man. Dr. Stephen Callaway, a forensic psychiatrist, my colleague. I stood slowly, pulse hammering. He had consulted on high-profile cases, including mine. He had been studying the puppeteer's patterns, dissecting his mind just as I was trying to do with Daniel. And now he was dead. My head spun. The killer wasn't just recreating past murders anymore. This was something else. Something personal. Monroe's voice was tight when he spoke. "Dr. Carter, do you still think Weaver's not involved?" I looked back at Callaway's body, my gut twisting. I wasn't sure of anything anymore. The theater was suffocating. Even with officers moving through the space, cataloging evidence and taking photographs, the crime scene felt unnervingly still, like the bodies might stir if we listened closely enough. Dr. Stephen Callaway was dead. Someone had put him here, seated like an audience member watching a nightmare unfold. And the others, 4 new marionettes, their strings disappearing into the shadows above, were proof that the puppeteer's performance wasn't over. I turned away, swallowing the bile creeping up my throat. Monroe stood near the stage, jaw tight. He ran a hand over his face before speaking. "Someone explained to me how a man locked in an interrogation room can still be murdering people." No one answered. I forced my voice to stay steady. "He's not working alone." Monroe's gaze snapped to me. "You think he has a partner?" I shook my head. "Not a partner. A successor, maybe. Or a copycat. If Weaver was dreaming about the first crime scene before it happened, maybe someone else is dreaming about these now." Monroe exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. "I hate this. You're not the only one." I turned back to Callaway's body. The skin around his mouth was cracked, his lips stretched unnaturally wide. I had seen forced expressions before. Ropes, hooks, even stitches used to create horrifying smiles. But this was different. His mouth had simply stayed like that. It was like he had laughed himself to death. "Something's wrong with him," I murmured. Monroe frowned. "No kidding." No, I mean physically. Look at his nails. I crouched beside Callaway again, pointing to his fingers. His nails were jagged, broken, splintered from the inside out, like they had been scraping against something hard. Was he trying to claw at his own face? Monroe asked, unsettled. I didn't answer, because there was something else, something worse. Callaway's pupils were dilated, his veins faintly visible beneath his skin. His lips had a bluish tint, the same symptoms I had seen before, years ago, in patients suffering from a very specific kind of neurological reaction. A thought struck me, sharp as a blade. He wasn't murdered, I whispered. Monroe gave me a sharp look. Carter. He died of a seizure, I interrupted, standing quickly. Or a stroke, maybe even a heart attack. Something triggered his nervous system, overloaded it. And that expression, I glanced at Callaway's eerie, frozen grin, my stomach knotting. Whatever he saw before he died, he found it funny. The words felt wrong in my mouth, but I knew they were true. A deep, sinking dread settled over me. Callaway had been studying the puppeteer. He had been researching the case, dissecting its patterns. Had he uncovered something he wasn't meant to? Had he seen something that had driven him to laugh himself into oblivion? Monroe's radio crackled. An officer's voice came through, shaky. Detective, we just checked Dr. Callaway's phone. He received a call an hour before his death. I already knew what he was going to say. The call came from inside Scotland Yard, from the interrogation room, from Daniel Weaver. Monroe and I exchanged a glance, the weight of the revelation pressing down like a vice. Daniel Weaver had called Dr. Callaway, an hour before his death, from inside Scotland Yard. That's not possible, Monroe muttered, already pulling out his phone. Weaver's been in custody this whole time. He turned to the officer. Pull the call logs. I want to know exactly when it happened, how long they spoke, and whether there's a recording. The officer nodded and hurried off. I exhaled slowly, my thoughts churning. If Weaver had spoken to Callaway, what had he said? Could words alone have driven Callaway into that unnatural, grinning death? The idea was absurd, and yet. I turned, striding toward the exit. I need to speak to him. Monroe caught my arm. Carter. I need to know what he said, Monroe. If he spoke to Callaway before he died, he might know something. Something we don't. Monroe hesitated, then cursed under his breath. Fine, but I'm coming with you. We drove back to Scotland Yard in silence, the city passing in a blur of headlights and rain. I gripped the edges of my coat, trying to ignore the gnawing sensation that we were running out of time. Daniel Weaver was exactly as we had left him, sitting in the same chair, hands still cuffed to the table. But when we entered, his gaze lifted to mine, something unreadable lurking behind his dark eyes. You've been busy, I said, pulling out the chair across from him. He tilted his head slightly. So have you. Monroe leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You called Stephen Callaway. A flicker of something crossed Daniel's face, recognition but not surprise. He exhaled through his nose. So, he's dead then. The confirmation sent a chill down my spine. He hadn't asked. He had known. I forced my voice to stay even. You tell me. What did you say to him? Daniel studied me, his fingers flexing against the cuffs. Then softly he said, I don't remember making that call. Bullshit, Monroe snapped. We have the logs. Daniel ignored him, his gaze never leaving mine. But I remember his voice. A quiet pulse of unease ran through me. What do you mean? Daniel leaned forward slightly, the dim light casting sharp shadows on his face. He called me first. Silence. Monroe straightened. That's not what the records show. Daniel's lips twitched. Then the records are lying. I frowned. You're telling me Callaway called you and then... What? You called him back? Daniel exhaled slowly, his expression tightening. Number I don't remember calling him back. But I do remember what he said. I swallowed. And what was that? Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. It's already inside me. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Then, for the first time since I'd met him, Daniel Weaver smiled. Daniel Weaver's smile was slow, deliberate. Not wide like Callaway's frozen death grin, but something else. Something quieter, more insidious. A creeping, knowing smile. Monroe stiffened beside me. What the hell does that mean? Daniel held my gaze, his dark eyes glinting under the dim interrogation room light. That's what he said, right before the line cut off. It's already inside me. The words curled around my thoughts, digging in like hooks. I kept my voice even. And you don't remember calling him back? Daniel tilted his head slightly. I don't remember picking up the phone at all. The air in the room felt heavier. My instincts screamed at me that he was lying, but not in the way most criminals did. This wasn't deception to cover guilt. This was something else. I leaned in, lowering my voice. What do you think he meant, Daniel? What was inside him? Daniel's fingers twitched against the metal cuffs. For the first time, something flickered across his face. Hesitation. Then he whispered, I think it's the same thing that's inside me. A chill scraped down my spine. Monroe scoffed, pushing off the wall. Oh, come on. But I wasn't listening to Monroe anymore. I was watching Daniel's hands. His fingers curled slightly, like he was testing them. His wrists, where the cuffs met his skin, were raw, red. Had they looked like that before? Daniel, I said carefully, when did your hands start hurting? He blinked, as if noticing them for the first time. Slowly, he flexed his fingers again. They don't hurt, he murmured. I swallowed. Then what do they feel like? He exhaled, shaking his head. Like they don't belong to me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Monroe had had enough. He slammed his hands on the table. All right, I don't have time for riddles. You were at the first crime scene. Now there's a second one with another set of bodies, and a man you conveniently spoke to is dead. So tell me right now, who the hell is pulling the strings? Daniel's smile faded. For the first time, he looked tired. You still think there's a who, he murmured. That's your problem. The room fell silent. I felt it then, that slow, creeping sense of wrongness that had been growing since I first stepped into that underground theater. Daniel Weaver wasn't the puppeteer, but he wasn't just a pawn either. He was something else entirely. Before I could speak, the door burst open. An officer stood in the doorway, his face pale. Detective Monroe. He hesitated, glancing at me, then back to Monroe. You need to see this, now. Monroe cursed under his breath and shot me a look. Stay with him. Then he strode out, the door slamming behind him. I turned back to Daniel. His smile had returned. It's starting, he whispered. Daniel's words clung to the air like smoke. It's starting. I kept my expression neutral, but something deep in my gut twisted at the way he said it. Soft, assured, like he wasn't warning me, like he was welcoming it. I folded my arms, forcing my voice to stay even. What's starting, Daniel? He exhaled, looking past me, past the walls of the interrogation room, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. Then he spoke so quietly I almost missed it. It's waking up. A sharp knock at the door made me flinch. I turned to see Monroe standing there, his face pale, jaw clenched tight. He jerked his head toward the hallway. Out, now. I hesitated, glancing back at Daniel. He didn't move, just watched me with that eerie, unreadable calm. Monroe didn't wait. He turned and strode down the hall, expecting me to follow. I did. The moment the door shut behind us, Monroe grabbed my arm and yanked me farther down the corridor, lowering his voice to a sharp whisper. We've got a problem. I pulled free. No kidding. What? He handed me a file. A fresh case report. My stomach sank as I opened it. Another murder. Another underground theater. Another grotesque stage arrangement. And it had happened 20 minutes ago. My pulse pounded in my ears. Daniel's been in custody all night. Monroe nodded grimly. So unless he's got a twin we don't know about, there's no way he did this. I scanned the file, my fingers tightening around the pages. The scene was identical to the first two murders, except this time there was something new. A single sentence, scrawled onto the back wall of the stage in what looked like smeared ash. Look up. A shiver ran through me. Monroe pulled out his phone and tapped at the screen. We also pulled the call recording between Weaver and Callaway. You need to hear this. He pressed play. At first, just static. Then, Callaway's voice, trembling. Daniel, is this you? Why did you... Static. Then a sound. A chuckle. But it wasn't Callaway. It wasn't human. A rasping, distorted noise slithered through the speakers, something wet, something clicking, like too many mouths moving at once. Then, it's already inside me. Callaway's voice cracked on the last word, turning into something breathless, laughing. A laugh that built, rising, stretching, until the line cut. Silence. A cold weight settled in my chest. Monroe exhaled sharply. Tell me you have an explanation for that. I didn't. Because in the interrogation room, Daniel Weaver was still smiling. And through the one-way glass I could have sworn, just for a second, something else was smiling with him. I couldn't breathe. The recording still crackled in my ears, Callaway's laughter stretching into something unnatural, something wrong. The distorted voice, not human, still slithered through my mind, leaving behind an oily, sinking dread. Monroe ran a hand over his face. I need to know what the hell we're dealing with, Carter. Because if Weaver didn't kill Callaway, and he sure as hell didn't commit that latest murder, then I finished for him. Then something else did. Monroe didn't argue. That scared me more than anything. I turned to the one-way glass. Daniel sat on the other side, still cuffed, still smiling. But something about him felt off. Or maybe I was finally seeing him for what he really was. I need to go back in, I murmured. Monroe tensed. Are you sure that's a good idea? Number. It wasn't. But the pieces weren't fitting together and I needed to hear it from him. Before Monroe could stop me, I stepped back inside. Daniel didn't move, didn't blink, just watched me with quiet amusement, like he had been waiting. I shut the door behind me. Tell me what's happening, Daniel. He tilted his head. You already know. I sat across from him, fingers laced together, trying to keep my voice steady. You didn't kill those people, but you knew it was going to happen. Why? Daniel exhaled slowly. Because I feel it, Doctor. Carter. Like a thread pulling at the back of my mind. He glanced down at his hands, flexing his fingers. Like something else is moving me. A chill ran through me. I thought of Callaway, of his broken fingernails, his too wide grin. Is that what happened to him? I asked. Did something take control? Daniel was silent for a long moment. Then softly he said, It's not control. I swallowed. Then what is it? His smile widened just slightly. Permission. I stared at him. The room suddenly felt too small. Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice. Have you ever felt it, Doctor? Carter? That fleeting moment when your thoughts aren't quite your own? A flicker of impulse you don't recognize? A whisper at the edge of sleep, nudging you toward something you'd never do? My throat was dry. It's waking up, he had said earlier. I thought of the victims, of their unnatural stillness, their rigid postures, like puppets hanging on invisible strings. My stomach turned. You think it's spreading? I whispered. Daniel's expression softened. almost pitying. It's always been here. Some of us are just more willing to listen. I felt sick. My fingers curled against my palms. Something outside the room creaked. I turned sharply. Through the one-way glass, I saw officers moving in the hall, but something else was there. A shadow in the corner, too tall, too thin. Watching. Daniel Weaver smiled. You feel it now, don't you? I couldn't speak, because for the first time, I did. I couldn't move. The shadow in the corner of the hallway stood too still, too quiet, watching from the edges of reality like it had always been there, just waiting for me to notice. The more I focused on it, the harder it was to tell if it was even real. My pulse hammered. Behind me, Daniel Weaver chuckled softly. It doesn't like to be seen. I forced myself to look away from the glass and back at him. He sat perfectly still, but I could feel the shift in the air, the way the walls seemed to inch closer. You're afraid now? He said, tilting his head. That's good. I gritted my teeth. You want to tell me what I'm looking at out there, Daniel? Because if you're not the puppeteer, then what the hell is? Daniel exhaled, thoughtful. I think you already know. I wanted to scream at him, wanted to grab him and shake him until he gave me something real, but I didn't dare move, because in my periphery, the shadow twitched. Something inside me snapped. I shot up from my chair and yanked open the door. The hallway was empty, no shadow, no figure, just the quiet hum of Scotland Yard at midnight. I swallowed, my skin crawling. You're looking in the wrong place, Daniel called from behind me. I turned back. Excuse me? His gaze was steady, almost amused. You're searching for something outside yourself. But what if it's already in here? He tapped his temple lightly. My stomach twisted. I could still hear Callaway's voice from the recording, trembling. It's already inside me. The air in the room shifted. The light above us flickered. And then, Daniel moved. In a single fluid motion, he lifted his cuffed hands and pulled them apart, snapping the metal restraints like they were made of paper. I stumbled back. Jesus Christ. Daniel stood slowly, rolling his wrists like a man stretching after a long nap. His eyes flicked to me, sharp, amused. See? He murmured. No strings. The door behind me burst open and Monroe charged in, gun raised. Get down, Weaver. Daniel didn't flinch. He just smiled, wide. Not a human smile, not a normal one. A grin stretched too far, his skin pulling in ways that shouldn't be possible. His eyes darkened, shadow swallowing the whites. Monroe's hand trembled on the gun. Daniel took a slow step forward. I did the only thing I could. I grabbed Monroe's wrist and fired. The bullet hit center mass. Daniel staggered back, collapsing into the chair. Blood spread across his chest, his lips parted, and he laughed, a wet, broken chuckle, curling into something deep, inhuman. Then, finally, silence. Monroe's breath was ragged. My hands shook, but Daniel Weaver was dead, or so I thought, until I turned and saw my own reflection, and I was smiling.